is Tim Barnett with Stand to Reason. And tonight we are going live to talk about a really important subject. In fact, the topic under discussion is a Christian response to COVID-19. And let me give you a little bit of context for why we're having this discussion and why we have a very special guest. Last week, I did a discussion with Abdu Murray on this very issue. And when I have questions, like serious apologetic questions, I go to my favorite apologist. And that is my boss, Greg Koukl.
Thought you were going to say Abdu Murray.
That's right. And so I just end up calling Greg and going through some of these questions with him. And it just occurred to me, man, we should be recording this live, because he was giving some really good answers, and no pressure, Greg. But he was giving me some really good answers. And I thought, man, why don't we hop on maybe next week and we do a live event where I just give you these same questions, some of these same questions, and you just give these answers. Mm-hmm. And so he agreed. And so I have with me very special guest, my mentor and friend, Greg Koukl. How you doing, Greg?
Hey, Proby. Good to see you.
Well, it's always good to see your face, and in high definition, even. You're looking good, my friend.
Thank you.
And so
I'm just about 4 weeks away from 70. So
are you serious?
I like that. It's a nice round number.
It's 70, man. That is. Are you doing anything special for 70?
Am I what?
Are you going to do anything special for your 70th birthday?
I haven't even thought about it, to be honest with you. I just kind of cruise through life. I don't pay a lot of attention to these things. I feel kind of like the same way I've felt for the last 40 years. So, it's just a number on the calendar kind of thing. And actually this somewhat relates. This is a good springboard to something I want to say as we launch out here, Tim. Sure. Talking about COVID-19, because it turns out that different people respond in different ways to difficult circumstances. Mm-hmm. And so, sometimes people are thinking, wow, what a great opportunity to share with my friends about Christ during this time. And I think that's going to be true for a lot of people, but for other people, it's not going to even, come up on the radar in any natural sense. Maybe what's happening for some other people is not increased opportunities to engage others on their own convictions and talk about ultimate issues. Maybe for some people, man, this is a rare time of spending a lot of time with your family, with your wife and your kids, and investing in them in a certain way, or maybe even just hanging out. I know for us, we're about 5 or 6 weeks into this whole thing. And initially, I think it was a little bit difficult for Dad to be around all the time. They appreciate when I go off out of town, and they get a little break from the all-seeing eye, like Mordor, looking down on them. And so there was a little adjustment there. And I think it's an adjustment for my daughters being together all the time, because they're not away at school, but they're in the house, and they're young teenagers. And so you know what that's like. That can be a problem. Yeah. But see, that was initially. Now we're all kind of getting used to it, and it's kind of getting nicer to hang out together. Yeah. And for me, this hasn't been an opportunity for me to talk to more people about Christ, not in my circumstance, but it has been an opportunity for other things to happen. So I'm basically kicking off our discussion here by simply saying there's not a one size fits all for the Christian response to COVID-19. Some of the issues that we're going to talk about, and you'll be asking some questions, and we'll chat about these things, do have very broad application. And others are just going to be particular. They're going to be individual. They're going to be based on circumstances and the individual situation. Yeah. And that's kind of the way life is, where we try to take a life as it comes to us. I made a note here yesterday or the day before as I was anticipating our time together, and I wrote on the page where you have your questions, Tim, and I wrote to myself, I almost never think about these questions. And the reason is because I just have an SOP, a standard operating procedure in facing life. And I just go about my business that way.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of ups and downs in the last 15 or 20 years, and some of them really significant, lots of challenges, some health, some emotional, or with relationships and stuff like that. And I figure this is just life, to a great degree. One of my favorite lines is, life is hard, and then you die. Fortunately for us, and I have been thinking about this more, Tim.
Yeah.
Our 70 isn't the end of it. It isn't life is hard and then you die and that's it. There's nothing else after that. In fact, we are just beginning our life. We're at the front edge of a never-ending, deeply satisfying life, fulfilling God's purposes. And it's just a little messy right at the beginning, these 70, but it gets better. And that is always an encouragement to me. So this is something where our people, our community here that I'm speaking with, who are concerned legitimately, and who are fearful, understandably, and who are wondering about the care and the welfare for their own family. And I get that. For me, there's a sense in which that's always a factor, living in a fallen world. And sometimes it's not as bad, and sometimes it's really bad. Or another way of saying it is sometimes it's really good, and sometimes it's not so good. But the point is, living in a fallen world, it's up and it's down, and it's up and it's down, and it's always something, kind of deal. You get one thing right, then something comes in the back door. And that's okay. Now, sometimes the thing that comes in the back door is really devastating for a family. I understand that. But most of the time, it's just an annoyance and a pain. And life is filled with those kinds of things. And what we do as followers of Christ is we, how does it say in 1 Peter chapter 4, let him who suffers according to the will of God entrust himself to a faithful creator in doing what is right. So my question in these environments is not like, wow, where did this thing come from? Is this a sign of the end times? Or why is there so much, evil in the world? And I understand those are questions that people talk about and raise, and we'll talk about ourselves here, but they're not questions I ask myself, because I know, well, this is the way life is. Life is hard, and then you die. And I want to make the best use of my life, the good times and the bad, that the Lord allows to come into my life to accomplish the ends that he has for me. Because these are ends that pay off in eternity. Last line here from 1 Timothy. Physical exercise profits little. I mean, you go to the gym, you can work out, okay, that little profit. But godliness, Paul says, is a means of great gain, because it holds a promise not just for this life, 70, but also for the life to come. And that's the perspective. I probably should have ended on this note here, but I'm just launching out with this because that's the perspective that I'd like our people to be taking away, not just from our time together tonight, Tim, but from the COVID-19 challenge and all the other challenges that will be inevitable in their lives.
Well, I think these are good comments to start with, because they kind of set the stage. We're obviously going to be looking at these specific questions as we go along. But in the end, I mean, as Christians, this kind of thing shouldn't surprise us. So you're giving us a good foundation right from the start, right? And so, but these are the kinds of questions that we're seeing online. I mentioned on Facebook that we were going to be having this discussion, and people started putting in their questions. These are the things they want Greg to answer. And so hopefully we'll get to some of those. And if people are watching online right now, because we are live, if they put their question in the comment section, those end up coming up on the sidebar, the chat, and I'll be scanning those as we go. And if we can get to some of them, I'd like to ask you. And so if people are listening, throw your questions in the comments, and we'll see what we can do with those. But just as a starting point here, I thought, this question we could probably spend the next hour talking about, but it's kind of like the big one, right? How does one, especially the Christian, reconcile pain and suffering, COVID-19, suffering in the world, with this idea of a good God, a powerful God, the Christian concept
Sure.
of God in the Bible.
Sure.
So how do we do that?
See, I hope this doesn't sound self-serving, Tim, but I never struggle with that question. And the reason why I don't struggle with that question is that there is no people who ask the question think that there's something that's not fitting right with certain theological claims we make. So we talk about God being good and loving, and then these things happen. How can that be if God is good and loving? It turns out, though, with a robust Christian worldview, you see much broader than that. Sure, God is good and loving, but there's more to that. We don't just have a God up there who wants us to have a nice time. We have a God who's dealing with a big problem. Now, I like I read a lot about wars and stuff, and because I for some reason it fascinates me, and especially the Second World War, particularly the European theater, the Western theater. And actually, I just started. This is probably crazy, but I just started The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich like 2 nights ago, which is 1,000 pages fine print, but it's the best work on the issue. But you know, when we decided to invade Europe, we realized that this was going to be a costly enterprise. We realized that there were not only loss of life of combatants, but also of non-combatants. And tens of thousands of people, for example, that are civilians died on D-Day through the bombing that was necessary to create a beachhead, basically, or an opportunity for a beachhead there in the attack. And so the big picture, you see the big picture. You see a problem that is meant that we're seeking to solve, that there is a price to pay in the resolving of it, with the hope and expectation in the case of that war that we will get to a point where the enemy will be defeated and freedom and liberty and peace will be restored. Now, in our case, there's not a question about that. We know that's going to happen. And there are many times in Scripture where we're encouraged to think about that. Set your eyes completely on the hope that is set before you, fixing your eyes on Jesus Christ, the author and perfecter of our faith, those kinds of things. Lots of passages that help us look past the temporal and onto the eternal. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, in the last few verses, momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory. So back to the main point here, when I look at life, and I'm not saying I'm impervious to suffering, the pain of hardship and disappointment and whatever. Trust me, and you know a little bit about this, Tim, because we're friends and we have private lives that we share. There have been a lot of things that I've suffered with, but the big picture to me matters. And it allows me to get through the small things. And the big picture includes the reality of this kind of stuff in a world where God is loving and powerful, because we're at war. God has established a rescue plan. We made a mess of things in the beginning, and now it's a cleanup operation. But the first thing to get cleaned up is us, and then God's going to clean up the rest of the world. And that's going to take time to bring in the fold, so to speak, and restore things the way God wants to at the end. And in the meantime, we're in a battle. And when there's a battle, there's there are casualties. This question, maybe here's a way of thinking about it. When people ask, well, look at all the stuff that's going on, how could a good God allow that? It's like, to me, it's like saying, how could a good general allow his soldiers to be killed on the beach, Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, Iwo Jima? How could he allow that if he's a good general? Well, because he is a good general. He knows that there's a price that has to be paid to win the battle. And this is the way it works out. And we can trust the general in this case. And so the maybe another way of approaching this, basically I'm just saying there's nothing strange that's going on here. This fits right in with the program. In fact, these are Peter's exact words in 1 Peter chapter 4. Yeah. He says, why are you amazed at the fiery ordeal amongst you, as if something strange were happening to you? Now, I think he's speaking there specifically of persecution that Christians were experiencing, but there were hardships that he spoke about in other parts of the book. And I think this is the point. Don't be surprised at this kind of ordeal. This is the way the world is now. and the world is this way because it's broken. It's broken for a reason. And we have the story that tells why it got broken and how it's getting fixed. And it's getting fixed by fixing us first. And so much of the time, the hardship that we face in the world because it's broken is part of the antidote, the RX to fix us. All right. And I just encourage anybody listening to what I have to say who's been around the block a few times with the Lord. You're going to look back on your life and you're going to think of times where something really nasty hit you. And at the moment you're thinking, where the heck did that come from? Why did God allow this in my life? And then now, in retrospect, years later, sometimes you look back and you say, I see what was going on there. Yeah. And I didn't like it, but I wouldn't trade it, because what I have now as a result is so much better than what I would have had without that. That I am glad that God showed me the grace to allow me to experience that thing. Yeah. So that's kind of the perspective. I don't see a disconnect between the goodness of God and the power of God. This is our story. Our whole story is about the problem of evil. It starts in chapter 3 and it doesn't get concluded until 66 books later. Mm-hmm. You know, I got John Noyes here sitting there chuckling at my sermon. It's the whole story. If there was not a problem of evil that prompted questions like people are asking about this, there wouldn't be any Christianity. There wouldn't be our story.
Yeah.
Our story is about the problem of evil. And I like the way one of my daughter's teachers put it once. He says that we shouldn't be caught by surprise because this is part of our story. First point. Second point, and our story is not over yet.
Yeah.
I thought that was great. Our story is not over yet. And so we're in the middle of the story. And if you pick up the Rings trilogy or something, and the Fellowship, and you're reading this nice story about the hobbits and the elves and the dwarves, and they're going on this little journey to get rid of this ring. And then all of a sudden, all kinds of things happen. They go into Mordor, and Gandalf gets whacked and the orcs are chasing them. And then the big eye is looking down on them and the Fellowship's all broken up and the Uruk-hai's got the guys. And you're thinking, man, what a lousy story.
Yeah.
Because my advice is keep reading. Right? The story's not over yet. And that's key for us. Yeah. The story's not over yet. Don't be caught by surprise by these kinds of things. Once COVID's over, it's going to be something else. I promise you. Just like Jesus said, in this world, you will have tribulation. So there's a promise. Life is hard and then you die. Get used to it. But we're not alone. And this isn't the whole deal. This is just the front end that's a little messy. And then it gets really good after that.
Well, I hope. This is so good already, Greg. And I've got my pen out here, and I'm making notes as we go. Really, and I know people are appreciating what you're saying. I just want to acknowledge people in the chat. Emily says, "Greg, you are so wise. Thank you." That's so sweet.
Well, I wish my daughters would say that, but anyway, thank you. That's a kind thing.
We have Samuel here. He's a friend, and well said, Greg. I don't like it, but I wouldn't trade it. That's gold, he says. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of people tracking here with us. Sure. Now, when people raise this, the reconciliation of evil and a good God, they're presuming that there's a way the world ought to be, right? There's the way the world's supposed to be. And I know you got a good way of talking about this in terms of, a exposure.
Yeah, that's a folksy way of putting it. Now, there are actually two elements here, Tim, just to keep them clear.
Yeah.
One is the approach that people take, and this comment you're asking me to speak to is deals with this part of it, that look at all the evil in the world, therefore there can't be a God. I mean, that's a standard atheistic response. And listen, when I talk to atheists, I tell them, I get it. I can understand why you'd think that way. I can see from where you stand, it makes a lot of sense. Okay. But let's just set aside the question about why would God allow some of these things. Now we're just dealing with the question of whether these kinds of things disqualify the existence of God at all. And actually, I think that the problem of evil, broadly considered, is not a good argument against the existence of God. It's actually one of the best arguments for the existence of God. And the way I put it in the folksy fashion that you were making reference to is that everybody knows that there's something wrong with the world. It doesn't matter when you lived or where you live. This is universal. Everyone knows that things ain't right. Or to put it in another way, things are not the way they're supposed to be. Okay, now think about that.
Yeah.
Almost everybody will agree with that. They're not the way they're supposed. That ain't right. That shouldn't happen. And by the way, that is the substance of the complaint. How can a good God allow what ain't right? All right, that's what we're facing here. But think about it. In order for there to be a condition in which things are not the way they're supposed to be, that requires that there is a way that they're supposed to be that they're not now. Problem of evil. But there can't be a way that they're supposed to be unless you got a sposer. So you gotta have, if you don't have a standard of how someone thinks the world ought to be in the objective sense, not just the subjective sense, in the big picture, okay? Because that's the nature of the complaint. People aren't just saying, hey, I don't like that. It's like rutabagas. Are you kidding me? I'm not eating those things. Or Brussels sprouts. Those are even worse. No, we're not talking about that kind of thing. We're talking about things that ain't right. Well, wait a minute. There can't be things that ain't right unless there are things that are right. And there can't be things that are right unless there is a standard of right and therefore wrong. And you cannot have a standard of what's right or wrong, a law, so to speak, without the lawmaker. And this is what I'm getting at. Okay. Now, I'm just going to say, for those who are wondering, scratching their head, they never heard this before, there is no way around this. There just isn't. I've heard the attempts, and they all turn out to be some kind of relativistic answers. Well, evolution made my morality. Well, maybe he made your morality one way, but he didn't make my morality your way. Evolution made my morality different. So who's to say that your evolutionary morality is better than mine? It's just another type of relativism. Or the social contract. Can't we all just get along? Well, that's just all getting along. We just agree to get along in a certain way. But the folks next door in another culture, they found a different way to get along. And they decided the best way to get along is to get rid of all the Jews. We're just going to kill them all. Okay? Because that's better for us. So who's to say under those circumstances? The social contract, the evolution approach to answering that question is just giving you a fancy form of relativism. But that's not the complaint. The complaint isn't that things happen that our culture doesn't approve of or that I don't personally like by my evolution. The complaint is there's some things that ain't right, period. Yeah. And that could only be the case is if there's an objective standard. You can't have that by any naturalistic means. Nature cannot make things wrong, period. Okay. And the only other alternative that I've heard is something like, I'll just mention it for those who might recognize what it is. It's called moral Platonism. Yeah. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's not going to work either. But almost nobody is going to use that. The point I'm making is I've looked at the alternatives to God grounding morality, and there aren't any that are going to be adequate to explain the morality we experience. The fact that there's evil in the world proves that there's a God. Okay, so that sets one issue onto the side that resolves it in my own mind. Now, it does remain a legitimate question in your first one. Why would a good God who does exist allow evil in our lives? And I think the answer is simply put, I do develop this quite a bit in the book, The Story of Reality. The answer simply put is because he has a good, morally sufficient reason for allowing bad to happen. Do we know what that reason is? A lot of the times we don't. But the little exercise I suggested a moment ago where we're kind of looking back over our shoulder and seeing, oh, that's what God did. There are times when we can see the morally sufficient reason after the fact. But for the most part, we don't know all the things that are going on in God's mind. But if he does, in principle, certainly could have a morally sufficient reason, well, then a good God would allow evil for a season. Look, my daughters don't like shots. I don't know about your daughters, Tim.
They don't like
They
needles.
don't like shots. Oh, that nasty papa. He takes them to the doctor. The doctor sticks that steel thing in their arm, and that hurts, man.
Yeah.
Evil papa. You know, why would you do that? I'll tell you why. Because I have a morally sufficient reason for causing pain in the moment.
Yeah.
Little pain now, no pain later. No pain now, big pain later. Okay. Maybe I should say that again. People are trying to write that down. I got this from my pastor many years ago. No pain now, big pain later. Little pain now, no pain later. And that was his justification for disciplining his son when his son was a kid. But it's a good principle. It's a good aphorism. And that's, I think, the way God is working too. He allows pain now to accomplish a greater good in the future. And if he didn't allow the pain to accomplish that, there'd be greater evil in the future.
Yeah.
At least in principle.
That's really good, Greg. And just for our listeners here, you were talking about how you're left with something like relativism. And this is something that atheists affirm. I mean, Richard Dawkins, in A River Out of Eden, I think, he says that there is, in a universe like this of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces, some people are going to get lucky, some people are going to get hurt, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. And he says, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. And he's not alone. I mean, this is kind of standard. This is standard response.
Oh, that's great. And you had the whole quote. You left out the word blind and blind, pitiless indifference, but that's pretty impressive, Tim. I know you use this a lot, but it's very compelling because Richard Dawkins at that point is speaking accurately from within his worldview. In other words, this is what his worldview amounts to. Mm-hmm. Ironically, I was on a program earlier today with Frank Turek, and this very point came up because the way that what's his name again? I got Hitchens' name in my head.
Oh, Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins, thank you. Richard Dawkins puts it, he said, this is exactly the kind of universe, we live in exactly the kind of universe you'd expect if the Darwinian materialistic view was true. And then he gives this runoff, which ends with nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, no evil, no good, et cetera, et cetera. Some people get lucky. And when I thought about that, I said, that doesn't describe our universe at all. Our universe is absolutely thick with morality, and everybody is aware of it, and we're always talking about it. So where does he get off saying this is the kind of universe we'd expect, no evil, no good? Of course, it's a universe filled with evil and good. And this comes to the point of what I would consider the explanatory power of the Christian worldview. And some people maybe have heard me say this before. When my 15-year-old was about 8, she asked me, Papa, how do we know that God is true? How do we know that God is true? And so I'm thinking about how to explain our reasons for belief in God in a way that she could understand it. And it suddenly occurred to me this phrase that really captures it. I said, the reason that we believe God is true, honey, is because he's the best explanation for the way things are. He's the best explanation for the way things are. And so we're talking about that right now. What is we have two choices here. Richard Dawkins' view, no evil, no good. Or the biblical world view, evil and good. And we're in the midst of a lot of evil and we suffer from it. Well, probably I suggest the second is more accurate, since that's why people are complaining all the time about the problem of evil. And even Richard Dawkins offers the same kind of complaints when his guard is down and he's not protecting his philosophical turf. We know better. And so one of the reasons I'm compelled about the Christian worldview is because something like COVID-19 is pretty much what you'd expect if Christianity were actually an accurate view of the world, the true story of reality.
Let me just plug our new conference name, which is Reality. Here and last week, sorry, and the reason we went with the word reality is because we are in the habit of saying, Greg, that Christianity is the best explanation of the way things are.
Yeah.
There's different ways you've put it. You've said reality is on our side. It is our ally.
Right.
And it's true that not everything in Christianity is perfectly tidy. Some things are messy. Right. But when it comes to you're looking at all the alternatives, and this is what I want to ask you about next, because there's a question that you have started asking, and I've started using it too.
Okay, before you get to that, I just want to clarify that I had nothing to say about the new name for Rethink. Okay, I was not campaigning so I get more book sales or whatever. I leave that up to you guys to make the decision. It actually didn't even have to be one that I liked, a new name. It just couldn't be one that I disliked. And so the team went, did their thing, and they came up with, I think, a really good name, Reality. Okay, good. So there you go. Just so the record's clear, Tim.
Yeah, no, you weren't even at the table. That's right. We were all out for dinner or something, and we were bouncing names off each other and this kind of thing. And I don't know if it was me or someone else said Reality, and of course the reason was because that's we are always saying Christianity is the best explanation of the way things are. And by the way, other ministries, I mean, I've been to conferences where other speakers are using the exact same phrase. And I know they're picking it up from what we're doing, and that's so which is awesome, Yeah. So just a little plug for the Reality Conference. That's the next one's coming up in September in Orange County, so people are going to want to watch out for that. And so let's transition to that. What's your question that you'll ask? Okay, so there's evil in the world. What's the alternative? Right. And so what do you mean by that when you ask that question?
This is good. No, that's good. And I like what do you mean by that question there? Our first Columbo question. So I'm in the web of Tim's game plan right now. And he moves so smoothly. Many of you didn't notice it, but I know what you're doing there, buddy. All right. And my dad used to say you can't con a con man, right? So when I raise the question of what's the alternative, I am trading on the notion I was talking about earlier that I think Christianity is the best explanation of the way things are. Yeah. Now, if you think that Christianity is false, okay, I respect that. People have to make their own decisions up about this. But if you think it's false, that means you suspect something else must be truer. And maybe you don't got it all dialed down, but you're leaning in another direction, okay, because it seems more reasonable, all things considered. Now, for a lot of people, this is just moving to, getting God out of the picture entirely, okay? Especially when the problem of evil is so forceful in their lives, they say, I can't believe this. Young people have a tragedy in their family. Somebody dies that's close to them. That's it, man. I'm done with God. I'm an atheist kind of thing. All right. I get that. I understand it. But this is where this other question comes in. What's the alternative? Because when I talk about the problem of evil now, and I've been doing it this way for many years, when I go on campus, I tell people, look, I get it if you're going to be an atheist because of the problem of evil. Okay. But the problem of evil is not a Christian problem. The problem of evil is a human problem. It's a problem that every single human being has to make sense of because they live in a broken world. We all know that there's something wrong with the world. So wherever we land, we need to land in a place that answers the big questions in a way that's consistent with the way the world actually is, as we perceive it. There's got to be a fit there. By the way, that fit between our answers regarding the world and the way the world is the classical definition of truth. All right. And so my appeal then to an audience is if you leave God because of the problem of evil, for atheism, okay, now how do you solve the problem of evil? Because, and this is what they haven't thought about. They haven't gotten rid of the problem of evil. They've just gotten rid of one potential solution. They've gotten rid of God. But the evil that they complained about is still staring them in the face. Every particular thing that bothered them morally, offended their moral sensibilities, that ain't the way it's supposed to be kind of thing. Yeah. Those are still there staring them in the face. Okay, now with the resources that materialism gives you, with the resources that atheism gives you, now how do you answer the question? And see, now I don't think they're going to be able to do a good job. I did have one atheist on the air as I pressed him on some questions to clarify when he's talking about evil, what he means, because he's trying to ground evil in evolution. I said, so in other words, for you, evil is something that disagrees with your evolution. Well, that's true. That's what his point of view would be reduced to, but it sounds ridiculous. But when I asked him that question, he said yes. He said, yeah, it disagrees with my evolution. I said, okay, well, I rest my case. Well, I can't say anything more. But that's what I'm getting at when I say, what's the alternative? Now, I did a mentoring letter last year sometime. Mentoring letter is what alternate month writing that I do. We do a solid ground, which is about 3,500 words, alternating months. And then every other month we have a mentoring letter, which is one page, where I just try to cover something in a quick fashion, but something substantive. And there was one letter I just talked about this.
Yeah.
What's the alternative? I think it was this was around the time of some school shootings. Actually, it'd be good for people to resurrect that, because this is a big public issue that was raising questions in people's minds about the goodness of God. Okay, now we got a different kind of question. And my point in that article regarding the shootings is the same point that I'm making right now. This question never comes up to me, because this is exactly what I'd expect if the world were the way the Bible describes it to be. And by the way, what's the alternative? What is the alternative? I'm ready. I'll listen to hear what you have to say. But Eastern religion is not going to help you here, because that's a denial of reality more than anything else, at least Vedantic Hinduism. And so anyway, that's the way that particular phrase plays itself out. And I think if you get the concept, what's the alternative? That's a question you could then ask others to help them to see that the worldview that they're adopting is not going to be adequate to the task of explaining the world that actually exists with all its warts and all kind of thing.
So I just did a quick search and found the article on from our website and posted in the chat. So if people are wanting more information about that approach, which is, I think, just brilliant, just click on it, and it's a less than 10-minute read.
Yeah, it's 800 words. It's easy.
Yeah. So let's go back to some questions related to COVID-19 here. I have one here. Did God send, or maybe just to strengthen kind of the question, did God cause the coronavirus? And kind of related to that, is this God's judgment on humanity? Sure, is he judging the West, or is it judging?
Yeah, it is very tempting to jump to that alternative for certain Christians. Mm-hmm. And I recall a similar kind of statement was made, pardon me, regarding when New Orleans got the hurricane and so much of it went down. Well, that's because of the, all the immorality in New Orleans and the French sector, or, and all of that. Is that what they call it? The French Quarter. He goes there a lot, baby. That's why he knows what it's all about.
That's a lie.
No, he's up in the New York area. Go park your car in the yard. That's where he's from. But so that was the comment. See what God brought judgment on the French Quarter. Well, it turned out the French Quarter was in high ground and hardly got touched by the hurricane. It was all the poor people in the lower ground that got hit. Yeah. And so I think that we have to be very careful about drawing conclusions about that. Generally, when you look in Scripture, the idea that God brings pestilence, plague, hardship, difficulty, storm, locusts, things like that, to bring judgment to a people is not foreign to Scripture, okay? However, when that happens, it's almost always announced beforehand. I'm reading right now through Jeremiah, all right? I just read Jeremiah 11 this morning, and Jeremiah is saying to Judah, the southern kingdom, with Babylon, crouching on its border, the Babylonian horde, and Nebuchadnezzar, Jeremiah is saying, all right, you guys, you're going to get it. You're going to get it. You're going to get it. And you're going to get it bad. And don't let anybody tell you differently. There's a whole bunch of people you're listening to, false prophets, that are saying peace and safety, peace and safety, peace and safety. Forget about it. It's coming hard, and you're going to knock you right out. Okay? Plenty of warning. And by the way, you see that Jonah, the same thing. You see, and lots and lots and lots of examples of this, okay, in Scripture. So the pattern seems to be when God is about to judge for a specific thing, in other words, a surgical strike, then he's going to announce it beforehand why he's doing that. Okay. Now, he's going to come and judge the end of the world. That's going to catch the world, by surprise when Jesus returns. But that's when he's taking care of everything. When they are crying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like birth pangs with a woman with child, as 1 Thess 5. But as it turns out, in all the other cases where you have surgical strikes, there was warning. Even in the case of Noah, we have biblical evidence that Noah is preaching to the people for 120 years as he's building that boat, right? And letting them know the end is coming, kind of deal. So there's no such preachment regarding this particular thing, COVID-19. So I have no reason to think that God is judging, using that as an act of judgment against anyone. And again, by the way, who would that be? Old people? God doesn't like old people, man. He's going to judge them really bad. Because it's mostly old people that are dying, especially old, sick people. God really hates, if you're old, he doesn't like you. But if you're old and really sick, then he really doesn't like you. That's kind of the thinking here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just encourage Christians, do not go there. Just leave that stuff alone. I don't think it's theologically sound. And I do think it inhibits our credibility when we talk like that with people. There's going to be a time of judgment, and that's going to come. And there ain't going to be any question about that being God when that happens.
And when Jesus is speaking about the Tower of Siloam falling on 18 and killing them, he says to them, do you think they were worse offenders? No. Unless you repent, you will all likewise perish.
Right.
And so they might have assumed, hey, maybe these people were worse.
Sure.
And God was judging them. He says, no, they weren't worse sinners.
That's right.
And he seems to be speaking directly to this idea.
Yeah.
Right?
And what's neat about that illustration, I good for you, because I couldn't remember exactly how to describe it, but it came to mind when I was making my explanation. And that is that Jesus is talking about this incident of a tragedy, and he is then referring to the ultimate judgment.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to escape, on the big judgment, unless you repent, turn to God on his terms, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was actually a question in the chat came up here that would relate to what we're talking about. Someone had mentioned, and I'm just trying to look for it now. There's been a lot of comments. They asked the question, why don't people, here it is, Joe. Joe says, why do people like to not think about death? And I think this relates to what we're just talking about. Actually, it reminds me of that C.S. Lewis quote, right? Mm-hmm. How God whispers, in our conscience, speaks
in the good times, but screams in the pain,
yeah,
right?
It's his megaphone to rouse.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's a good point. Although, when you take the question at face value, why don't people want to think about death? And it's the same reason that they don't want to think about being waterboarded for 24 hours straight. It's just not a fun thing, right? Unless, there are people, let's face it, even listening, this isn't me. I'm not attained to this level yet, but anticipate their death joyfully, knowing that it is a corridor transporting them into the presence of Christ and out of this vale of tears and into the promise that God has for us, and all the benefits of that, the perfect justice, perfect mercy I talk about, the final resurrection. and so some people do think about that joyfully, but most don't. I'm not, I think about it a little bit more now than I have before, because the sands are going through the hourglass and there's more in the bottom than in the top. Yeah. And they're going faster than they used to go, as that happens. Yeah. But I think my assessment's more like, okay, what am I going to do with the time that I do have left? How am I going to make the best use of it? And I'm not just thinking in terms of being a super duper, ministry monkey or something like that. I'm thinking about my family and my kids growing up and my relationship with my wife and my home and things like that too. There's a lot of things that I think about, but I don't think about my death. However, there are times like this, and let me back up for a second. Part of the reason I'm not inclined to think about it is because I have resolved that question. Mm. Okay, the sting of death is sin, right? And so is that the way the passage goes? And then 1 Corinthians 15, and so, but Christ has resolved that. I have confidence in the grace of God. And even though I'm not looking forward to the lights going out, and especially that usually they don't go out really fast for most people. They start getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, and everything else starts going out before the lights go out. And that's not fun. Okay. But not looking forward to that. But the idea that, being with the Lord, I got that resolved. All right. I understand the grace of God, and I'm comfortable with that nothing I do is going to rescue me. Mm-hmm. I love this passage from Psalm 130. It'll be on I think it's Psalm 130. It's on it'll be on my tombstone if I have one of those things. And all the psalmist says there is he's reflecting on the grace of God and on the nature of sin. And he says, Lord, if you should mark iniquity, in other words, if you're keeping count, if you should mark iniquity, oh Lord, who could stand? Who's going to make it on that ground? Nobody's going to make it. Okay. But the psalmist says there is forgiveness with you. And so this is my confidence in Christ, and that there's mercy with God and there's forgiveness with him through the sacrifice of his son. So I don't think about death so much in those terms, but people who don't have that resolve and don't have that confidence and have that promise, COVID-19 type things brings them back to the reality of their humanity, the reality of their contingency. They're not going to live forever. And maybe we ought to think about that more than what we have been thinking about it.
Yeah.
And that means opportunity for Christians with non-Christians during this time. They're starting to think about that.
Yeah, that's great. Here's another question. And this one is an interesting one, because there are some Christians, and maybe it's because of their theology, maybe like a word faith theology. And they may ask the question, if God loves me, if I'm one of his children, will he protect me from this pandemic? Will he protect me from COVID-19? What are your thoughts on that?
No.
I thought you'd say that.
Well, I mean, that's the simple answer. It's not the answer people want to hear, but it's not only the simple answer, it is the correct answer, and it is the obviously correct answer. And when I say obviously correct, every Christian can look at their life, and as I was talking about earlier, life is hard, and then you die. You look at all of these kinds of things that God allowed to come into your life for some reason. And God didn't protect you from that. Mm-hmm. He didn't keep you from that. Now, I know some people are going to read Psalm 91, and that psalm really annoys me, actually. It's a really pretty psalm, but I don't know what to make of it, because it can't be considered it's poetry. You can't be considered as promises that, no plague will come near your tent, and 10,000 will fall at your left side, and it will not come near you, and all of these wonderful things. And I think it's talking about, in the broadest sense, the safety that we have in God, but it is not promising that no harm will ever come to us, because harm has come to every single one of God's children. Harm came to God's only son, and not just on the cross. Harm came to him all through his life. He was despised and rejected of men. He was betrayed by his own.
Yeah.
His own family thought he was crazy. His mom and his brothers came to get him. You're loony. Come on. We're taking you home. This guy had suffering like we don't know. And I'm not, even before he got to the Garden of Gethsemane and after that.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you look at 1 Peter, I've mentioned already, 1 Peter was a book that was written to suffering Christians. Just read it. You'll see it. It's obvious. 1 Thessalonians was written to suffering Christians. Yeah. 2 Thessalonians was written to suffering Christians. Let's see. Hebrews was written to suffering Christians. Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and 2 Timothy, at least, were written by Paul when he was in prison. Prison's not a nice place at any time, but in the first century, please, okay? Yeah. So how does anybody get the idea that God is going to protect them from all of the vicissitudes of living in a fallen world. By the way, that's going to be true for the non-Christian. For the Christian, it's even worse, because we're fighting a different battle than the non-Christian is. They're fighting a battle with, a fallen world, just like we are. But we're also the bad guys to the world. We're soldiers behind the enemy lines here. And that's why Jesus said, in this world you have tribulation. They persecuted me, they're going to persecute you too. Okay, so the Christians should be mentally prepared to embrace a lot more difficulty than the non-Christian. Okay, but remember, we are the ones who have the promise that none of this suffering is to be lost. The non-Christian doesn't have that promise. And I cited one here: momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal way to glory. That's 2 Corinthians 4:16, I think, or 17. It's the affliction that's producing it. And then, I had another verse too on the top of my head, but I lost it right now. But there are multiple references that it is the hardship we endure that secures for us a better resurrection. Hebrews chapter 11 talks about that. So do not, if you're a Christian, do not look to God to rescue you from all your troubles.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. Thankfully, I had a teacher when I was a very young Christian who said this, magnificent. I've remembered it for years because it's been so helpful. He said, Jesus is not the bridge over troubled waters, but he will pull you through the troubled waters if you can stand the tow, is the way he put it. It was great. Yeah, it was great. And I'm reading through the scriptures this year in 2 Samuel, when David is king. God made all kinds of promises to David. You realize that David had to fight for every one of those things that God promised would happen. When I say fight, I mean he had to pull out his sword and he had to kill people in order to get it. He had to defend himself against Absalom. He had to defend himself against Saul. He had to defend himself in all of these circumstances. He was on the run early in his life and late in his life. Even though God had made all these promises, which God fulfilled, it still was a battle to get it. And I think it's a really good picture of the Christian life. And unless we resolve ourselves to the idea that that's the way it's going to be a fight until the end, then we're going to have a really hard time dealing with the realities of living in a fallen world as followers of Christ.
And it was David who wrote Psalm 23, right? In verse 4, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
Right.
And so he doesn't pull him out of the valley. He's in the valley, but God promises to be there with him.
That's right. And
that is the promise that we have as followers of Christ. This is good, Greg.
And Jesus said, in the world you have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. So he's beaten it. We will have victory in the end. And he is with us through it now.
Yeah.
He is with us through it now. And does it feel like he's always there? No, it just doesn't. This is a promise we count on because God's good at his word. We are not moving forward based on feelings. We are moving forward based on facts that we put our trust or our faith in the person who has rescued us and is there by us.
Greg, I wouldn't mind your thoughts on John 11. You have the story of Jesus healing Lazarus.
The account.
The account. I know. The account. Or the
Bible stories, not little felt people.
Yeah.
That's real. These things happen. Yeah, go ahead.
And so in that account, you have Lazarus. He's sick. And Jesus finds out about it, and of course Jesus stays. He doesn't go to heal him. And then once they find out he's dead, then they go to the family, and what they find is that Lazarus is dead, and you have Jesus weeping. I mean, he explains them, I am the resurrection and the life. And then Mary comes out, obviously hysterical, and Jesus, if you were here, you could have done something.
She's right.
Yeah. And then Jesus.
She was right. He certainly could have done that,
And so
he says, wait, hang on. The story's not over yet. He says, in a sense.
And this seems to, I mean, this kind of, to me, this account speaks to a God who cares and suffers with us, right? There's something really, I mean, deep about that shortest verse in the Bible, right?
Jesus wept.
The first verse I memorized as a kid, John 11:35. Jesus wept, right? And
that really taxed you, Tim.
Yeah. I mean, it's Bible trivia, right?
Yeah,
It's only two words, and yet how much theology is in there, where you have a God who comes down to rescue us and even weeps with us.
What's interesting? I'm sorry. Yeah, it's interesting about the passage. One of my early teachers pointed this out. Jesus didn't just weep; he also got angry. And it's hard to translate this portion of the passage, but it's like he snorted like a horse who's pawing the turf. This is the word picture there. And the way it was explained to me, and this could be a very good insight, it says Jesus wept at what was happening. He was angry at the impact of sin in the world. That it would. Now, he knew, as you're pointing out, Tim, that he would raise Lazarus is going to walk out, okay? And unwrap that guy, he's coming back. But still, the circumstances were egregious. They were sad. They were worth weeping over, which is why Jesus wept. And it's a great illustration or a big insight that you're offering, Tim. God weeps with us, even though he knows it's going to be changed. He knows what it's like to suffer, not just himself, but suffer loss of a friend. There it is. Even when he knows that's going to be reversed in just a few moments. It's still anguish that he felt.
That's good. Okay, let's grab another question here. I just want to look at the time, make sure we're doing okay, because we're getting near the top.
Before you do this, okay, I got a really quick thing, because this was on your list, and it'll tie into the last thing.
Sure.
God doesn't owe it to us to heal us. That's the point I was making earlier. But sometimes he does. Sometimes he does. So you want to pray? If you're sick, pray. I mean, the Bible tells us to do that. James says, you pray. Had the elders, somebody lay hands, pray. You have not because you ask not. So we can still pray for what we want and ask God for what we want. Yeah. But he is not obliged to give us everything we want, even especially in the area of health, wealth, and prosperity. So just to make that clarification for you.
No, that's good. I got to put up Victor's comment here. He said the book should have been the account of reality.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
I've read your book a couple times, and I mean, you read the first couple of chapters, and you're talking about a story and a true story, and the difference between a true story and a made up story, and so I mean that word just is ingrained in my mind.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, no more complaints from me.
Okay, so here's a good one. And this is actually what got me thinking about us doing this conversation, because you had a really good insight into this. The question was, how do we differentiate between faith and foolishness in response to the safety guidelines from authorities? Mm-hmm. And so, you see on the news, some of these pastors, in fact, I think one guy died from COVID-19. He said, I'm going to have faith. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm going to go about my business. And this was a pastor, and he ended up getting COVID-19 and dying.
Yeah, lucky guy. He's in heaven now. Just think of it.
Yeah,
right.
Okay. So how do we balance those two things?
Right. Well, there's actually a couple things going on here. One is the government too, and so we have an obligation to obey our authorities, and the government has set certain restrictions in place. And I'm not going to get into the policy issues right now, but it's important. That's an important feature of our response. We have an obligation to obey the authorities around us, and that are legitimately over us. But this is really a little bit of a different kind of question, because this is a question about faith. Isn't it a lack of faith to put on a face mask, when I will trust God to protect me? And goes back, I guess the best illustration is in Jesus' life when he's being tempted by the devil. And one of the temptations was to put him on top of the pinnacle of the temple, throw yourself down, and your angels will catch you. And actually the devil quotes Psalm 91 there. You won't stub your toe against a stone. And then Jesus said, it's wrong to test God. And what he meant there is it's wrong to act in such a way where you at least think you're forcing God's to move his hand. You're forcing his hand. This was Judas's mistake. Jesus, you're the Messiah. Get moving here. Okay, I'll betray you. And then maybe when you realize you're captured, you'll break free and blah, blah, blah. Well, God's got a different way than we do. We do not test God in that way. So what this means is that we have an area of responsibility where we take care of ourselves. And I actually don't remember all of what I responded with you in the first point. So if I leave out anything really important, you can remind me. Lightning doesn't always strike twice, at the same spot intellectually. So, but I think of it like this, and actually the May mentoring letter will coming out in a week or so. We'll be talking about this. Is that God has his role, I have my role. God is 100% responsible for whatever he wants to do. I'm 100% responsible for what I'm supposed to do. So when I get in my car, I put on my seatbelt. It's not only the law; it's smart. Okay, I don't say, "Hey, no seatbelt." Hey, no windshield. What the heck? God's going to protect me. I'm in the sovereign hands of God, and then do stupid stuff. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make the best choices I can, given the sets of circumstances, the moral obligations, the laws, and everything like that. And then God's got to pick up the slack. I can't do all of this. He's in charge of that. Okay. So I have life insurance. I have health insurance. Well, I have Medicare, so I got that. But we all have, at Stand to Reason, we have health insurance. You're not trusting God. No, I am trusting God. I'm just not being stupid. All right. I'm doing the things that are appropriate to do to protect myself, and not testing God as some would do. Now, maybe wearing a mask might be the right thing to do to protect yourself from the virus, or something like that. So we do what we can do. Social distance or whatever it happens to be. We don't act stupidly and then expect God to rescue us from our foolishness and call that spirituality.
Yeah.
Is that what I said last time?
Yeah, no, you did. You mentioned all those points. So that was
okay, good.
Lightning did strike in this account, in this account twice. How about this one? This one came up on Facebook. Do you think the church in the U.S. will look different post COVID-19, and if so, in what ways?
Will the church look different?
Yeah, you think the church,
like a local church or the body of Christ?
I'm guessing he didn't specify. So let's just say the local church.
Okay, I my guess there is that people in that situation are going to. Of course, I don't know, but I'm just saying, I think they're going to flock back. And the reason is now you're doing church on TV, and it ain't church. It's just a TV show. Now that's maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but there's no personal engagement there. I'm not with my brothers and sisters worshiping where I can hear their voices and I can feel the warmth of their bodies around me and the intensity of their passions or whatever it happens to be. I can't feel it. It's all one dimensional right there in front of me. And that's better than nothing, but it isn't church. And I think that there's a lot of people that are going to feel like, oh man, I want to get back with my family. I want to connect with my family. All right. So I think I could be wrong on this, but I think that there's at least I think the people that are really serious about their relationship with the Lord and their Christian brothers and sisters are going to look forward to getting back. Some people who don't care that much, they're going to say, well, I'll just keep watching it on the screen, and I can check it off that I did my religious thing on Sunday, so I can be a good religious person. And they aren't going to come back. Okay, well, that's all right. There's wheat and there's chaff, in my view. But there's other things, though, when you think about this, and I mean reflect on our own organization, the adjustments that we've made. I think that what this difficult time has done is and even the lockdown, the stay-at-home policies, whether they're sound or not, wise or not regarding the circumstances, it's what we're facing. And it has forced many people, to develop workarounds. that they can get the jobs done. And they're going to realize, hey, this is actually better than it was before in this particular area. Now, in a business, it means a lot of bricks and mortar places are going out of business because people are used to ordering online. Maybe some restaurants will never see people again. They're just going to order, do takeout. I don't know. To me, going to a restaurant's fun. It's not just the food, it's the whole environment. But all things considered, we just ordered out from a favorite Mexican restaurant, and our bill was 1/3 of what it normally is sitting in the restaurant. And that was pretty tempting now that I think about it, for a number of reasons. But but anyway, so I think that there is a lot of good that's going to come out of this. The way we've been able to interact and as a team, having our staff meetings online and the like, people not having to drive into the office for that on Tuesdays and fight LA traffic. So we've learned some workarounds that will probably be durable because we've found better ways to get our work done. And I think that's going to be true of a lot of people as well.
Yeah, that's good.
Silver linings.
Greg's not a prophet, but I think we can count on some of those.
And I'm not a son of a prophet either, actually.
How about we close with this one? This also came in on Facebook. What are the best ways for Christians to continue evangelism efforts while social distancing? Do you think anything changes for you, or do you just?
Well, there hasn't been any changes for me. I'll just say that because most of the time when I engage people regarding the gospel, this has to do with the peculiarities of my own lifestyle. Most of the time is when I'm on an airplane, in a restaurant, or in another city doing an event. I don't have other events. I don't have airplanes, and I don't have restaurants. So I'm not doing a lot of evangelism right now. What I'm doing is a lot of training like we're doing right now. I've been on Facebook Live type things like this, like 5 times as much in the last month or so than I ever have before. You were
on with Frank Turk today.
I was with Frank this morning for his Enterprise CIA. I did a thing last week here with our strategic partners. I'll be doing another Facebook Live on Monday, and I'm thinking about talking about how tactics keep you safe. I'm going to talk about tactics, and I'm glad you guys are doing the book study on Sunday night. You should say something about that here so other people know about it. But one of the big virtues of the tactical game plan is it provides a zone of safety for you like you never had before. And when I was driving over to John's here, thinking about the different ways, I came up with 5 different ways that tactics keeps you safe. It makes it easy and safe to be able to engage other people on important things. So I think that's going to be my topic on Monday night for my Facebook Live. And I'll be doing that solo, as in Han Solo. It'll just be me, the super. Tim won't be with. Maybe he'll be listening. I don't know. But that'll be Monday, I think, at same time, same station here. Same bat time, same bat station, Monday.
Yeah.
You ever hear that before?
Yeah,
that goes back to the 60s, just so.
Yeah. I guess it was reruns, the old Batman,
So you're groovy then, right? Okay.
Well,
you're groovy. I appreciate that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Far out, brother.
Yeah. Okay. This is probably a good time to close. Maybe it's past Greg's bedtime or something. Actually, but this does raise a really important point that we have a lot going on especially Facebook right now. And I think we're going to be doing some YouTube live stuff in the future. But right now, there is a book club. We are now on week 4, and we're going through the book Tactics, the 10th anniversary. Maybe some of you have heard of the book. We actually have the author with us, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. And there she is. And
that's John's copy. He's got it dog-eared here a bit.
Yeah, well, he better be ready for Sunday. I think we're doing chapters 10 to 13, something like that, or 10 to 12. And so it's Alan Schleman, John Noyce, and myself, and we read through those chapters beforehand, and we just talk about principles we like and how we use them and this kind of thing. And anything we don't like, we make sure to bring that up too. And hopefully we'll get the author in maybe for our last session. Sure. And we'll do like a ask the author anything or something like that. That'd be fun. And then of course we have other live events going. Greg, like you said, you're on Monday, and Alan Schliemann's been doing Wednesday, or is it a Thursday study? And I think it's Wednesday.
Hermeneutics, I think.
And he's hermeneutics. He's been going through how to read your Bible during a pandemic, I think is what they're calling it. And Alan's been doing a great job. So there is so much going on almost every day, some kind of live event happening on this page that you're watching this right now, on the STR, the Stand to Reason Facebook page. So be sure to look through, and all this stuff is recorded. I saw some people in the side chat saying, I really hope this is recorded. So it definitely will be on Facebook, and we're going to take the recording and put it on YouTube as well.
Yeah, super.
Greg, I really appreciate you coming on here and spending what turned out to be, well over an hour here with me.
It's a lot of fun, Tim. I always enjoy it with you. So, and we just recently did STRS together. We did 4 episodes last Tuesday. People will be able to hear those. Amy's still under the weather a little bit. We had a great time there. So I got a great team of people here I get to hang out with and to work with. It's a lot of fun.
So we appreciate everyone who joined us. Man, we love you guys, and we thank you so much for your support, your prayer support, your financial support. It really means the world to us, and give them heaven.
Hey, let me add, and we're here for you. This is another thing we just want to emphasize. We are here for you. This is why Tim and I are right. He's in Ontario, Canada. I'm almost south of the border. He's north of the border. I'm in Southern California, but we are here for you. We're meeting your needs, answering your questions, being your companions in lots of ways when you're holed up somewhere, and giving you opportunity to get more educated, to help you with your families, whatever it is that we need. We're praying. I want you to know I prayed for our community this morning, and for our donors and our supporters, for their sake, that they aren't hurt financially. Of course, I have an interest in that too, because you guys help us out, but we're looking after you, and that's where our concern is. So we're in your team. You're in our family, so to speak. So right. Give them heaven, just like you said, Tim. That was a good one.
Amen. All right.
Come up with that. That's good. I got to remember that.
I heard it from somebody. Nobody special. All right. God bless everyone.
Thank you.